We're parents, teachers, and educators, and like you, we're passionate about restoring our culture for Christ. This is Veritas Vox, the voice of classical Christian education.
Hello again, and welcome to Veritas Vox, the voice of classical Christian education. Today, of course, Laurie is with me, and that's because of the guest we have today that we know so well, and many of you will know his name from curriculum projects and many other things. Welcome, Ned Bustard.
Good to be here, friends.
Yeah, Ned, tell us a little bit about your family and how you got into the world of aesthetics and art.
My family, I've got three daughters, Carrie, Maggie, and Elspeth. And my wife, Leslie, we homeschooled for most of that time that they were growing up. They're all grown now, off in the world. And as far as getting into art, my mom was an artist when I was growing up. And she would say that she wasn't a good artist, but that was just because she grew up in a family that didn't really appreciate art. But she saw a talent in me and sent me to art classes and was always encouraging that in me. I also grew up going to a Christian school, and the school I grew up in didn't really have a strong art program. So I was kind of like the token artist in my school. So if you needed posters made or bookmarks or bulletin covers for programs and things, I was the artist. And so that became kind of formational in my identity growing up. And then I was going to take over my dad's business after college, and found out how much math you had to do to be a business major. So I said, that's not God's will. And so I went with art instead.
Tell us a little bit about Leslie, too. Of course, it wasn't long ago that she and you dealt with a tough providence of losing her to cancer.
Yeah, she passed over to glory a year ago. Yeah. And my wife, Leslie, folks might know her as well. She's written a lot, and she just came out with a book of her essays and poetry that came out a couple months ago.
And
it's called Tiny Thoughts That I've Been Thinking. Poetry. What's that?
You will want to read her poetry.
Yeah, it's like poetry about real things and real experiences and God's grace, and it really is. Yeah, if you don't like poetry, you'll still like her poetry.
That's true.
And she's I fell in love with her in college, and she did not fall in love with me until after college, and we got married soon after I graduated, or after she graduated, and then for 32 years, we were working together to add beauty to the world.
Well, I remember our first experience with your family was in 1995.
Okay, that was a long time
or maybe
ago.
96, where Laurie and I were at a church in Lancaster. We had not yet moved there, but we're planning to that May of 96. And we were there talking about classical Christian education while we were starting a school there, Veritas Academy. And Leslie came up to me after that and said, you've got to meet Ned, my husband. He wasn't able to be here tonight, but he will really want to work with you all and help build what you're doing. Well, at that point, Veritas Press was still yet to be born
in its infancy,
but it was something we were talking about. And quite honestly, the response that I had to myself was, yeah, right, because everybody's got a husband that's the greatest talent, and of course that's what wives are supposed to do.
Amen.
But what I didn't realize was she knew what she was talking about.
She did.
Ned you have been responsible for really creating the Veritas brand, the look and feel, the aesthetic. Tell our audience what has gone into that as you have done that. What really helped you help us shape things?
Well, I do remember the first time that we met. I remember sitting down with Laurie, or like kind of accosting you and saying, all right, I've got this whole vision for what the school should look like. And that was because Leslie and I had been reading Douglas Wilson and rediscovering the lost tools of learning and all that. So we were primed for this kind of thing. We had both gone to Christian school, and we knew we loved that, but we also knew what the problems were with that approach. So we were very excited about being part of all of that. And I think as far as the aesthetic that I brought, I mean, the one thing that I remember when we started working on Veritas Press stuff was I was excited with the history flashcards, is that art was part of it. Because
Front and center.
again, growing up in a Christian school, aesthetics really not high on the list.
Right.
Not on the list at all. You know, that I mean, we had an art class, but that was about it.
Yeah.
So I was really excited about that, and talking to Laurie about kind of, you know, why did this, you know, why is this happening? That it really surprised me that there was art at all. I mean, just it sounds funny to say that. Why would it be so exciting that there's just a picture involved, but that it wasn't. Also thing you have to understand with my background, my grandmother developed this extensive, like 4 to 6 week summer Bible school program that she did at my grandfather's church. And there was a lot of artwork involved in that, with flashcards to help with memory. So, but they were all things that she had clipped out of like Cosmopolitan magazine, or, you know, like whatever. There's a picture of a dog she had clipped out of something. So it was as pragmatic and functional as it needed to be, to just say, okay, this is a dog, or this is, so I was used to that approach to kind of learning, and to find someone who saw value in more of a fine art kind of approach was just really, really refreshing. So you brought.
I do. I remember this. I don't know if you remember this, but I remember telling you, I am so tired of children's readers and all these different things where they have a dumb drawing of a dog. If I'm going to look at a dog, why can't I go look at a painting of a beautiful dog and see art? Or if it's going to be a pig, I remember when we did the phonics flashcards,
P is for
I
pig.
wanted
Yeah.
that pig down at the Wit Museum. And it's like, I want a cool pig. So why not teach children, if they're going to look at something, I want them to look at beautiful art when they're little, not when they're 40 for the first time. I want it to be when they're toddlers, when they're learning, to get excited
Yeah.
about.
But it was, and we could talk a lot about it, but what you brought to us was not just art. It was also a graphic design and that integrated with ideas of good, true, and beautiful, and really created for us what Veritas looks like.
I mean, people used to collect, I think they still do actually, the catalogs, right?
Right. Yeah.
They would literally frame them. So it was like a really odd idea at the time to take a piece of fine art and put it on our catalog. And everybody would every year, and they still do, what's the artwork this year?
Yeah. Yeah.
Tease. Well, I don't know when this will come out, but anyway.
It doesn't do any good to tease because dates are irrelevant in what
they're
we're talking
irrelevant
about.
what we're doing, but we have a really cool catalog coming this year. It's fun.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was one of the things. I mean, as far as me and my graphic design aesthetic, well, I mean, I grew up loving fairy tales and Narnia, and so I've got this very medieval love. So I think that kind of
That helps shape.
It blended.
I think that frames it a little bit. Also, when I was getting into graphic design in the early 90s, there was a lot of interest in there's a approach called maximalism, where you basically throw as much different kinds of information in as possible, and it's a kind of a jumbled more is more rather than less is more. And I thought that was probably an pretty much anti-Christian way to do this. That what I believe
growing up on a page.
Well, exactly.
Growing up on a
And
page.
back in the early mid 80s, when I was learning graphic design, that was when, if you remember, like AT&T's logo was like the Death Star, and it was just these lines and I remember saying to my professor, I'm like, I want things to mean things. Like, I don't understand why we're making these logos and things that have no content to them, because
Yeah.
I believe everything has meaning. Everything is a teachable moment, as it were.
And
to
a,
have
a comprehensive integration
yeah.
creates more
But
memories.
is right.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, that's important, that there's this, that all these things have meaning, that it's not just, well, does that look cool right now? Or is that, hip? But does it communicate goodness, beauty, and truth?
And then we just work so well together. I mean, I'll tell everybody a fun fact here. I've said it a few times before, but I call it the shoebox. And so when Ned and I first started working together, I couldn't use a computer back then. And so because I didn't have a Mac, now I have a Mac, now life is good. But anyway, so literally I would have scribbled notes on a shoebox, and nobody besides Ned could ever figure out what I was talking about.
In the
In the
shoebox.
shoebox.
In the shoebox.
But
Yeah,
literally,
not on the shoebox.
there
Yeah.
was no explanation needed. I could just take the shoebox, hand it to Ned, and he and I just from the very, very beginning
Well,
just understood each other's language and were
Yeah.
Yeah.
amazing.
That was what was kind of amazing
Yeah.
about our work process, is that
But it's
that
still,
you and I communicate and you can't I don't know, you can't jury rig that. It's just we get each other, and we had a similar vision, and the things you loved were the things I loved, and that really helped really move the game forward.
and that was so true in Omnibus. I mean,
But yeah,
they're beautiful books. They're just beautiful
Yeah,
books.
for the audience's sake, Ned was the layout and design talent on all 6 of the omnibus text,
Yeah.
and it's really been well received, and the beauty of it is very notable when
Yeah.
you pick up a book. They're pretty substantial too because of their page count, but the beauty within them is really something that many people have commented
Mhm.
on.
Yeah.
Well, can I go back to what you were talking about? The P is for pig, the
Yeah.
Andrew Wyeth painting.
Yeah.
And I think for me that's an important thing to bring up, is that Leslie and I would talk about this, and this was a soapbox of hers, is that we're always forming the imagination of our children.
Absolutely.
And there's no neutral thing, that everything you're doing is shaping your child. I go to a Presbyterian church, so it's a big white box. And I always tell the folks that I'm like, you are making a theological statement by this big white box. That now, whether it's a good statement or bad statement, that can be debated. But I think there's this idea that if there's something that's not there, then that doesn't really communicate something. So like a blank wall doesn't really say anything. No, it does. It just might not say the thing that you're wanting to say. And so the idea of giving our children fine art at the level of phonics level is not that they're going to necessarily remember that painting or a specific painting, but they are going to have their minds and their hearts shaped by that early exposure to beauty. And Leslie would say that it's that shaping of beauty that prepares us really for Christ.
Absolutely.
Interesting. Unpack that a little bit more. How does attention to beauty at young age follow us into an understanding of the world in which you live and the truth
And who God is.
Yeah.
Well, I would say not even at a young age. I would say that we as adults tend to impoverish ourselves forcefully by not attending to beauty. Laurie mentioned Leslie's poetry. Leslie's poetry is just about attention to beauty. It's stopping and looking at a leaf. And that we as people are conditioned in our culture, busyness is the highest good. How are you doing? Well, I'm busy. Well, that must be a good thing. Well, it might be, or it might be that you're missing all of what God has set out in front of you. Because a busy person can't stop and look at a leaf and find, a ladybug, crawling up it. As far as how it relates to our understanding of God, I think that when you think about God as maker, the first thing we find out in Genesis is God made things, and he evaluates them. He says it's good. And so we talk about goodness, truth, and beauty, these transcendentals, and that they're all coming from God, and they're leading us to God as the maker. And I would say that with beauty, it is such a shaping thing. When we talk about, how music moves us, or art moves us, these things are things that get beyond our defensive. One of the great lines, Ty Fishers, the headmaster at Veritas Academy, said in my book, Teaching Beauty, he talks about how the bridges in our society bridges from truth to our society are burned. Like, we can't get to society through truth. You can't get there through goodness, because our society just has said that's not applicable anymore. But beauty, we can still cross that bridge and talk to our neighbors, because they don't have defenses for that. In my book, It Was Good Making Art to the Glory of God, Tim Keller talks about why we need artists in the church. He says it's because you can't get to these things without art. He uses the example of sinners in the hands of an angry God. Well, here, Edwards is saying, talks about the fire, the spider in the fire, and you're dangling over the fire, and you'd say, well, that's a visual. He's giving you this visual so that you can then get to this understanding. And so in that way, I think beauty is effective. I mean, I would hate to say to reduce our pursuit of beauty to the usefulness of it, but it forms us, and it makes it possible for us to turn and see God.
Yeah, and I would say, let me just say this one thing here, but as Leslie went through cancer treatments, and she would post on Caring Bridge, a woman that I know in Lancaster who doesn't even know Leslie, but knew of you because of Veritas, got on her page. And one of the things that she said that she couldn't believe as she was going in, to get chemo or whatever it might be, is she's talking about a painting on the wall, and she would talk about a new painting every time. And it was the door that opened up a conversation for the gospel for me that I would never have had with this woman. And it was the most bizarre thing. We're talking about, most of us, when we're in that position, are looking at the IVs and all this and how horrible it is. And your sweet wife was talking about the painting and what God had given her that day. And that is just a case of where beauty, something that she was talking about, opened up a door for me to have a conversation. So you're right, it does.
Yeah.
And then, there again, it's a lifelong pursuit of beauty that prepares you for that kind of thing.
Right.
That you don't hit cancer and you say, oh, well, now's the time that I'm going to stop and really see what God is doing.
Right.
No, you have to be doing that
intentional.
Intentionally. And that's why we're giving our little kids, fine art in kindergarten.
Right.
Well, obviously God created beauty. And the idea of beauty being important to us has been lost sometimes in certain Christian circles. And one of the things that we have wanted to do with you so much is to help people understand that as we're trying to recover a way of educating, that beauty is not just a nice thing to have with it. It's not just a good thing to have with it. It's an essential thing to have with it.
Right.
Because goodness, truth, and beauty collectively are what God created.
Yeah.
Right.
Schools should be full of, I remember, when we were first doing Geneva and Veritas, and one of the things that was so important is that we had art, real art. I'm not talking about posters that come from an education store, but I'm talking about real art, and the one thing I found is when a school appreciates and gets into that, artists are even willing to donate their things because they love so much that, anybody cares that students are seeing art, that they're willing to do that. But it's important for children. So if you're homeschooling your home, or, if you're in a school, that children are exposed to art on a daily basis.
Yeah, there's a value placed on that.
Yeah.
Because I think that we're so money driven in our culture that we evaluate everything based on dollars and cents. And I think that is to our impoverishment. Talking about hanging art in the schools, one of the things I did that was really fun with Veritas Academy is I organized, I have an art gallery downtown here in Lancaster, and I organized an invitational where I invited 6 different artists to each paint a picture based on one of the books in the omnibus.
Oh,
And
wow.
so each I did it for 3 years, and each year I did a different book because the omnibus,
Right.
are divided between ancient, medieval, and contemporary. And it was great. And we had, there was a winner, and that was then the school bought that. But then some of the other artists, they just ended up giving their artwork. So now Veritas Academy has all this contemporary art hanging in their hallways, and these are like large 20 by 30 paintings that are rooted in these classic, pieces of literature, so that you've got art in, it's just the aesthetic of it, but then you also have it saying, well, the books that we're reading in omnibus actually are able to speak in a contemporary way and are impacting the ideas of the art that these artists are making.
Yeah, what a great process, and to involve students in watching that happen.
Yeah,
really to help them imbibe what you're talking about.
Oh, and helping them see differently. I mean, Ty's wife Emily teaches Pilgrim's Progress, and there's this giant painting of giant despair that she takes them to every year, and she says it's the best thing because they've been reading these books, or this book, and they've got these ideas of it. And she said, now let's look at how the artist interprets this. And it just generates a lot of good conversation, and it helps the students see the book in a different way than
somebody else might have seen it. Yep.
Right.
What your work is taking you into other areas that are helping people, really, I guess, focused on the Christian and beauty. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, if it's not, I still will agree with it because it sounds like something I'd want to do. I think that sounds great.
So how is
I've got my book publishing company, Square Halo Books. We have a lot of books on art and faith. And I've got a new book came out like a year ago called Naming the Animals: An Invitation to Creativity. That is basically to help people kind of enter in. The history of art program I did for you all is for the same reason, to help people be able to understand art and to engage with art. I think a lot of, we were joking about Leslie's poetry and people liking it. I think that's the same problem with art, is a lot of people are just intimidated because they don't know the language. I have an art historian friend, James Romaine. He talks about having a Dick and Jane level of visual literacy. What he means is that we grow up reading See Dick Run, See Jane Hop or whatever, and we kind of stop there visually, so that when we enter a museum, we don't know what to do because we've not been given the vocabulary. And I think that's an important thing to kind of give. That's one of the reasons my gallery exists, to help folks engage with artwork and give them vocabulary for processing bigger ideas.
So put that, well, let me ask the question. So what does success look like in your calling then? If you were to continue doing the things that you're doing and have them expand and diversify a bit for another 20 years or so, what would you say this made it successful if you were looking back on it then, but speculating today?
Yeah, there's a video by a film company called Cursive Films, and they did of me. It's like a little documentary called Making Good. And in that video, I talk about this idea of success because, like I said, I was going to take over my dad's business when I was younger. And for me, success was, well, you make more money. That's how a business works. If you're not making more money, you're not successful. And I realized that presupposition didn't really help me when it came to my calling as an artist in the church. And I realized that my ideas of success couldn't be linked to my bank account. Because if it was, that was not really a true guide or a true measure, because the work that I'm doing as an artist and a Christian is to add beauty to the world. Well, it's hard to put a number on that. Like, people don't want to pay for beauty. People are resistant to beauty. And so for me, success is helping, the people who God have given me, my people in place, to love God and love beauty. So like, I've done a book that a series of books called Every Moment Holy, and
I was
they're
just having that in my head that's exactly where I was going to go next.
yeah. So Every Moment Holy is the 3 books. It's soon going to be 4 books that are contemporary liturgies, and I designed them, and I did illustrations for them, and I did them because I grew up in an Anglican background. I saw the importance of written prayers, but I also went to a Baptist school, and I knew that written prayers were of the devil, because that, you can't have prayers written down, because then you're not really allowing the Spirit to move. So I knew that something like this needed to exist, but I didn't know anyone else would. So I always tell people, I didn't think anyone would buy this book, because they're contemporary prayers. So if you grew up Anglican, you know that Anglicans are like, we've got a prayer book, we never need any others added to this, because this like came down from Moses, and or Cranmer, and it's the same thing. And or you've got folks who are like, well, I don't want to read, so there's no place for it. Turns out everyone has loved these books, and there's like, I don't know, 200, 300, 400,000 of these books out there. And so you'd say, oh, well, Ned, you're now successful. And I'm like, well, I guess, but for me, I'm making good things for my people in my place. The fact that people in California are appreciating it, well, praise God, Soli Deo Gloria. But in my thinking, I can't really base it on, whether there's people over there. Like, with what I do, how many likes I get on Instagram is important, because I'm a visual artist. So do I judge how I'm doing based on how many likes I got? Well, you could say that as a visual artist, that would be an important thing, but I don't think it really is. I think that I talk about, for several years, I would just make coloring pages for my church so that the kids would be able to engage with the sermon. I don't make any money off of that. Is that a successful thing?
Mm.
Well, I don't make any money off of it, so therefore it's not. Or yes, it is, because I am impacting the kingdom of God and, training up the children who God has given me to train. So
yeah, how many children, I can't tell you how many times I see posted on Facebook where kids have made, beads history of me, and we've got our ball of yarn with Google.
So adorable.
So adorable, Ned. You came up with that. Who in the world would have come up with that? And yet that has made more little people like history, because they've related to this red ball of yarn that turns into a timeline. I mean, it's just like, who thinks of, so the impact of all the children out there, or all the children that have learned to read. I mean, that for me, with phonics, and you and I did so much of that together, it's like there are kids reading the Bible because of this, right? And so
yeah, it blew my mind the first time
that?
someone came up to me, and they were like a 23-year-old, and they're like, would you sign my copy of Pan and the Man? And I'm like, yes, I guess, but this is for your daughter, right? They're like, no, I read this as a child. I'm like, no, that's impossible, because then I'd be an old person if that was the case.
We are old now. Just saying.
Crazy.
Yep.
It's amazing to think that you can have that kind of long-term impact. And I think that's, talking about homeschooling, I think that's something for homeschool parents to really embrace, because it's such a small work that you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Daily, like you're just a couple people, and you're trying to get them to do this Pharaoh's, crown craft. But long term, you're building the kingdom of God, and the ramifications, the ripples from what you're doing is incalculable.
Yeah.
And,
Don't
you know,
think that of, I think of Carrie. I mean, all your daughters are doing good things. I don't mean that, but I just in talking to her a couple years ago, and she now teaches at a classical Christian school in Manhattan, and
the only classical Christian
Yeah, the
school in New
only
York
classical
and the
Christian school.
only Christian school in New York. Let it be said.
That's
All right, go
serious.
ahead.
And she will say so much of who I am as a teacher is from my mom and my dad, and I know that's true. So
Yeah, she didn't go to, she went to school, college, but she didn't go for education. Everything is just drawn from her classical homeschooling.
exactly.
Yeah, we see that in
All the time.
spades. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's been great visiting with you and getting reminiscing a little bit. I'd be remiss if I didn't remind us of some of the all-nighters we pulled to
Oh
hit the
my goodness.
catalog deadline.
Our
With
kids sleeping
Lar-
on
Yep.
your floor.
Well, and Laurie and I sleeping on your floor while you were
Oh, my
working on the
word.
computer, waking us up to look at things to finalize. You worked all night and we slept intermittently.
Yeah.
Back when we were young and could do crazy things.
I
but
Yeah, I don't want to do that
I
anymore.
don't think we could do that, but I remember the donut runs in the morning because we had to feed all the kids and buy them.
Well, and my kids remember you guys coming over and just Laura, you always having sweet little fun things for Carrie and Maggie, and they always took your loving generosity to heart. And so yeah, those were fun times. And I
They
look
were
back,
fun times.
not only did we have fun and laugh a lot, I take great joy in just thinking about we made something from nothing and it was a beautiful thing, and that
That's
gives me
right.
great pride.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for being a part
Yeah.
of that. And thanks for joining us today. Folks, thank you for joining us on Veritas Vox, the voice of classical
Yeah.
Christian education. Hope to see you next time. Thanks, Ned.
Fine.
Thank you. This was fun.